The living room was filled with friends, laughter, and the soft glow of lights reflecting off champagne glasses. Music played softly in the background, blending with the happy chatter of the guests. My birthday was in full swing, but something felt off. I'd sensed it earlier in the evening, a lingering glance here, a hushed whisper there. But as midnight neared, my suspicions grew sharper, impossible to ignore. I spotted Olivia, my wife of 17 years, across the room. She stood close to my brother, Declan, laughing in a way that seemed overly familiar, her hand resting on his arm just a bit too long. I watched, feeling a prickling sensation in the back of my mind. They were both so wrapped up in each other that they hadn't even noticed me watching them. Taking a deep breath, I walked toward them, still holding on to a faint hope that I was imagining things. Maybe it was just the stress of work, the late nights that had kept me away from home. But as I approached, I caught Olivia's voice, soft yet clear, a tone reserved for whispers between lovers. So much more than he ever could be, she was saying, a sly smile playing on her lips. Declan looked at her with an intensity that made my stomach churn. "He doesn't know you like I do," he replied, his hand resting on the small of her back. "He's too busy with his job to see what's right in front of him." My blood ran cold. The world around me felt as if it had faded into silence, leaving only their voices echoing in my mind. "Olivia," I said, my voice low but firm. They both jumped, and she looked at me with an expression of faint surprise mixed with annoyance. It took her only a second to regain her composure, though, her face shifting into something colder, almost defiant. "Oh, George," she said, barely concealing a smirk. "I didn't think you'd notice." "Notice what, Olivia?" I asked, my voice calm, though every muscle in my body tensed. "That my wife is acting like she forgot she's married." She let out a short laugh, a mocking sound that stung more than I expected. "Married?" she repeated, her voice dripping with contempt. "To what? A ghost? A paycheck?" The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thick with tension as a few guests started to glance our way, picking up on the shift in mood. But Olivia didn't seem to care. She crossed her arms, her chin lifted defiantly. "He's been more of a husband to me than you ever were," she said, her tone laced with venom. "He's a real man, not just the paycheck you are. You think just because you provide that it's enough? It's been years, George. Years of me feeling like I'm married to a stranger." Declan shifted uncomfortably beside her, but he didn't look away. Instead, he met my gaze with a look of muted defiance, as if he thought he had the right to stand there beside my wife, to act like he'd taken my place. I felt a flash of fury rising in me, an anger I hadn't felt in years, but before I could respond, another voice joined in. It was Hazel, our teenage daughter. She had appeared out of nowhere, slipping beside her mother like a silent accomplice. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a strange, unsettling confidence. "Dad, don't bother asking questions," she said, her tone casual, almost amused. "Uncle Dec's been here more nights than you." I turned to Hazel, my chest tightening with a mix of disbelief and anger. "Hazel," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "do you even realize what you're saying?" She rolled her eyes. "I know exactly what I'm saying, Dad. I see things. I'm not a kid anymore. And it's true. Mom deserves someone who's actually around. Not just someone who sends flowers and a paycheck." Her words cut deeper than I thought possible, each one tearing through the remnants of the family I thought I knew. How had things reached this point without me noticing? Had I really been so blind? Olivia reached over, placing a hand on Hazel's shoulder. "See, George, even your own daughter sees it. I'm done pretending that this shell of a marriage is enough. Declan is more of a partner to me than you ever were." My mind went blank. I wanted to shout, to lash out, to drag them out of the house and demand answers. But a voice in my head held me back. They weren't worth it, not tonight, not here. I nodded slowly, forcing myself to stay calm, though my heart was pounding. "You think you know me, Olivia?" I said, my voice soft yet deadly. "You think this is who I am? Then you don't know me at all." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, ignoring the stares and whispers of the guests who'd witnessed the whole ugly scene. I headed to the garage, every step filled with a growing sense of purpose. I needed something that would remind me of who I really was. In the garage, I found an old, well-used baseball bat, a gift from my late father. I hadn't touched it in years, but tonight it felt right. It wasn't for violence. It was a symbol, a reminder of a time when I'd known exactly who I was. Gripping it tightly, I walked back into the living room, letting its weight ground me, calm me. As I entered the room, every eye turned toward me, faces filled with confusion and, in Olivia's case, sudden fear. "George," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "What are you doing?" I looked at her, then at Declan, my eyes cold and steady. "I'm done, Olivia," I said. "Done playing the fool, done pretending that this marriage is real. You think I'm just a paycheck? Fine. You can keep your lover. Keep your lies, keep it all. But know this, your actions tonight have consequences." She opened her mouth to respond, but I silenced her with a raised hand. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady. "And you won't see a penny of my money. I'll make sure of that." Hazel let out a shocked gasp, but I didn't look at her. I didn't need to see her face to know what she was feeling, betrayal, maybe regret. But it was too late for regrets. I was done being the man they could manipulate and take for granted. Turning to Declan, I took a step closer, the weight of the bat a silent reminder of the boundaries he'd crossed. "You had everything, Declan," I said, my voice low. "A brother, a family. And you threw it all away. For what? A few stolen moments?" He didn't answer, just looked away, his face pale. "Get out of my house," I said, my voice steady but unyielding. "Both of you. Pack your shit and leave before the morning. And don't come back." They stood there for a moment, frozen, before Olivia finally moved, her face a mask of disbelief and shock. Hazel clung to her, looking at me with a mixture of anger and sadness, but I held her gaze, my resolve firm. The morning light filtered through the kitchen window, casting a pale glow across the silent house. I sat at the table, hands clasped, staring down at the cold coffee in front of me. I had barely slept, thoughts spinning through my mind as I tried to make sense of it all. Footsteps creaked down the stairs. Olivia appeared, her face pale and eyes rimmed red, like she'd been crying all night. She paused at the bottom, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shame, regret, fear, maybe all of it, but it didn't matter. "George," she started, her voice a hoarse whisper. I didn't mean it. Not the way it came out." She kept her eyes on the floor, as if meeting my gaze was too much to bear. I let her words hang in the air. Then I finally spoke, my voice cold. "Oh, but you didn't mean it, Olivia." "Every word." She winced. No, I didn't. I was angry, George. I was hurt. And you were hurt?" I interrupted, letting out a harsh laugh. "You had Declan to comfort you, right?" I shook my head. "The man you threw away for a so-called real man has been nothing more than a paycheck to you? 17 years, Olivia. That's all I was?" Her hand reached out toward my arm, but I pulled back before she could touch me. "Please, George," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I was wrong, I know that. I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened. You weren't around, and he was there, and I needed someone. Someone?" I said, my voice sharp. "So you chose my brother? You chose the one person who's been around our whole marriage." "I didn't plan it," she burst out, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I was lonely. I didn't think. And then it got complicated." I shook my head slowly, the bitterness hardening in my chest. "Complicated? No, Olivia. It's very simple. You made your choice." Just then, I heard footsteps from behind, and Hazel appeared in the doorway. She hesitated, her gaze flickering from me to her mother. She looked nervous, her shoulders tense. "Hazel," I said, turning to her. "Were you in on this too?" My voice was harsh, colder than I intended, but I needed answers. Hazel's face flushed, and she looked away. "It's not what you think, Dad." "Then explain it to me," I demanded, my voice steady but sharp. "You stood there last night, taunting me, defending your mother's betrayal, as if I was the one at fault here. What do you have to say for yourself?" She bit her lip, finally meeting my gaze. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? But you were hardly ever here, Dad. Uncle Dan, he was around. He took care of us when you didn't. My stomach twisted as she said it. Took care of you? Hazel, I was working. For us. For this family. Everything I did was to give you the life you have. She crossed her arms, looking down. I know, but it didn't feel like you were really here. You missed so many things, and that justifies you turning against me? Against your own father? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Hazel, I need to know something. I need the truth. What do you mean? She asked, glancing at her mother nervously. I stared hard at Olivia, my heart hammering in my chest. Hazel, is she even mine? The room went silent. Olivia's face drained of color, her eyes widening. She looked from me to Hazel, as if she'd hoped that question would never come up. Hazel froze, her eyes darting back and forth between us. George, Olivia began, her voice barely a whisper. No, I want the truth, Olivia. I want the truth right now. My tone left no room for argument. Olivia swallowed, looking down at her hands. It was complicated, she said, her voice weak. Complicated? I repeated, my voice rising. How hard is it to tell me if I'm Hazel's father? Hazel's gaze darted between us, her face a mix of confusion and fear. Mom, what is he talking about? Olivia's shoulders slumped. I don't know, okay. She finally admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know for sure. Hazel's face crumpled, and she took a step back, her eyes filling with tears. Wait, are you saying you don't even know who my father is? The silence that followed was thick, oppressive, as if the weight of the truth was pressing down on all of us. I loved you, Hazel, I said quietly, my voice barely audible. Whether you're mine or not, I raised you. I thought I was your father. But this changes everything. Olivia's face twisted, her hands wringing nervously. George, please. She's still your daughter. She loves you. You're her father, no matter what. I shook my head. You're asking me to accept 17 years of lies, Olivia. 17 years of deceit. How am I supposed to just move past that? Hazel's voice trembled. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear. I looked at her, my heart breaking. She was the girl I'd raised, the girl I'd loved as my own. But now, everything felt different. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the gnawing sense that the life I'd built was built on lies. I'll find out the truth, I said finally, my voice cold. I'll get a test done, and if it turns out that you're not mine, I couldn't finish the sentence. The pain was too raw, too real. Hazel's face fell, and she looked at Olivia, her expression filled with a mixture of anger and betrayal. How could you do this to us, Mom? She whispered. Olivia reached out, trying to touch her, but Hazel pulled away. I never meant for it to come to this, Olivia said, her voice pleading. I was young. I was confused. And then George and we had you, and I thought it didn't matter. I thought we could just be a family. A family? I repeated bitterly. This was never a family. Not if you were lying to me from the start. Olivia's tears flowed freely now. George, please, can we just move on? Can't we try to fix this? Fix this? I let out a harsh laugh. There's nothing left to fix, Olivia. You've destroyed everything. You, Declan, Hazel, all of you were part of this lie. Hazel turned to me, her face pale. Dad, I know this doesn't make up for what happened, but I am sorry. I didn't know. If I had known, it doesn't change anything, Hazel, I said, cutting her off. You chose your side. You made your choice. And now, you have to live with it. The room fell silent. Olivia and Hazel stood there, both of them looking broken, defeated. And as I looked at them, the people I'd once thought were my family, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I was free. Free from the lies. Free from the betrayal. And in that moment, I realized that I didn't need them. I didn't need any of them. Days slipped by in an uneasy quiet. The house transformed into something cold and unrecognizable. Olivia and Hazel avoided my eyes, and meals were silent, no longer punctuated by casual conversations or laughter. We moved around each other like strangers, each wrapped in their own turmoil. Then, one evening, I found Olivia waiting in the dim light of the living room, wringing her hands nervously. Her eyes were red, her cheeks streaked from tears that looked fresh. I was about to walk past her when she dropped to her knees, blocking my path. I stepped back startled. "George," she began, her voice trembling. "Please, please, just listen to me." She looked up at me, desperation written all over her face. "I made a mistake. I was weak, but I need you to forgive me. For us. For Hazel." I clenched my jaw, feeling the anger flare up again. I wanted to look away, but her pleading eyes wouldn't let me. "Olivia," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "you didn't just make a mistake. You destroyed our family. You threw everything we had away. For what? A thrill? Some excitement with Declan?" She reached out to grab my hand, but I pulled it back, my gaze cold. "I don't understand how you can even ask for forgiveness." She shook her head, more tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was lonely, George. You were always gone, always busy with work, and I didn't feel loved. I was wrong, I know, but you were so distant. It was like you didn't even see me anymore." I crossed my arms, feeling a sharp pang of bitterness. "So, your solution was to turn to my brother? Did you even consider talking to me about this? Or was betrayal your first choice?" Her shoulders slumped, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I thought it didn't matter, that you'd understand if you knew how I felt." "Understand?" I couldn't hold back the scorn in my voice. "You didn't want me to understand, Olivia. You wanted an excuse to do whatever you wanted without feeling guilty." She dropped her head, sobbing quietly. "I love you, George. I know I've ruined everything, but I do love you. I didn't realize how much until now, when I see what I've lost." She took a shaky breath, her voice breaking. "I'm begging you, please, give us another chance." A voice behind us cut through the tension. Hazel stood in the doorway, her face pale, eyes full of regret. She walked toward us, her steps hesitant. "Dad," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry too." I looked at her, feeling a strange mix of anger and sadness. Hazel had been part of it, mocking me alongside her mother. Yet here she was, humbled, her bravado gone. "You're sorry?" I asked, my voice rough. "Hazel, you took her side. You stood there and watched all of it. And you acted like it was my fault." Her face crumpled, and she looked down, tears gathering in her eyes. "I was stupid. I didn't understand. I thought you didn't care about us anymore." I shook my head slowly, my voice cold. "Hazel, I gave everything to this family. Every single thing I did was for you. And when it counted, you turned against me." She swallowed, her voice cracking. "I know, Dad. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I see that now. Please just don't hate me." I took a deep breath, the weight of their pleas pressing down on me. But I felt nothing but emptiness. "Hate you? No, Hazel. I don't hate you. But forgiveness, that's something you're going to have to earn." The front door creaked open, and there, standing in the doorway, was Declan. He shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering to Olivia, then back to me. His face was tight, eyes filled with a mix of guilt and fear. "George," he began, his voice wavering, I came here to apologize. I know what I did was unforgivable, but I need you to know it wasn't planned. I didn't mean to destroy your life." "Didn't mean to destroy my life?" I echoed, feeling a fresh surge of anger. "You knew exactly what you were doing, Declan. You looked me in the eye at family dinners, laughed at my jokes, played the part of my brother while you were tearing everything apart." He looked down, swallowing hard. I was lost, just like her." "Lost?" I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and cold. "You want to blame being lost for sleeping with your own brother's wife? You betrayed me, Declan. You betrayed everything we stood for as family. And now you're here, expecting me to what? Forgive you." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His shoulders slumped, and he looked away, shame written across his face. "George, please," Olivia said, her voice desperate. "Can't we just try to fix this?" I stared at her, my mind racing with everything she had put me through, the betrayal, the lies, the humiliation. "Fix this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Olivia, you're not asking for forgiveness. You're asking for control. You had it all. You took it for granted. And now that you've lost it, You want me to just pretend it never happened? She clutched at her chest, shaking her head. No, George, that's not it. I swear. I just want us to be a family again. A family? I shook my head, feeling the coldness in my chest harden. This was never a family, Olivia. You and Declan made sure of that. Declan took a step forward, his voice breaking. George, I know there's nothing I can say that would make this right. I can't undo what happened. But I don't want to lose you as a brother. Please, if there's any way, I raised a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. We stopped being brothers the moment you crossed that line, Declan. There's nothing left here for you. You're dead to me. His face fell, his hands dropping to his sides. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to say something more, but he simply nodded, shoulders slumped, and walked out the door without another word. The silence in the room grew heavy. Olivia was still on her knees, her hands clenched together, her eyes pleading. George, please. I know I've hurt you. I know it'll take time, but I'll do anything to make this right. I swear it. I looked down at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. Anything? Olivia, you had 17 years to do something, to show me that you cared, to make this right. You made your choice. And now you have to live with it. Her face twisted in pain, fresh tears streaming down her cheeks. Don't do this, George. Please don't just throw everything away. I shook my head. I'm not the one who threw it away, Olivia. You did. And now, there's nothing left here for me. She sobbed, her hands reaching out to me one last time. But I stepped back, leaving her kneeling on the floor, broken. Hazel stood silently by the door, her face streaked with tears. I looked at her, feeling the pain of the truth I'd uncovered about her, the daughter I'd loved as my own. Without another word, I turned and walked away, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. The life I'd built was gone, shattered by betrayal, but somehow, I felt lighter. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: I was free. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. After our lives unraveled, Olivia was left to pick up the pieces alone. I'd made my decision to walk away, and I wasn't turning back. The reality of her new life hit her hard. She could no longer afford the house without my income, and her savings drained faster than she could keep up. She'd call, sometimes every day, her messages alternating between desperate apologies and bitter anger. But I ignored them, choosing not to fuel her turmoil any further. One afternoon, Hazel stood on my doorstep, her face guarded but eyes uncertain. I let her in, and we sat in the quiet kitchen, each moment stretching longer than the last. Dad, she started, her voice barely a whisper. I know I messed up. She looked down, fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. I thought I knew everything, but I didn't. I didn't know anything. She looked up, and I could see the regret pooling in her eyes. I shouldn't have taken her side. I was wrong. Hazel, I said quietly, you're young. You didn't ask for any of this. And I won't pretend it doesn't hurt, but you can't let her choices ruin your life. She nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I don't even know who I am anymore, Dad. Everything's different. The weight of her confession pressed on both of us, and she stared at me with the kind of uncertainty that only comes from being completely lost. A part of me softened, feeling the rawness of her words. You're still my daughter, I said. Whatever happens, nothing changes that. Over the following months, I kept my distance from Olivia and Declan, but the damage of their actions started catching up to them. Olivia tried to keep up with the mortgage, but the numbers weren't on her side. One evening, she called me again, and against my instincts, I picked up. Her voice was a hollow shadow of the confident, defiant woman I once knew. George, I need help, she murmured, her voice cracking. I can't do this on my own. I stayed silent, giving her space to fill the emptiness with whatever she thought would change my mind. Declan, he's gone, she admitted, barely above a whisper. He left when things started getting rough. Said he needed time to think. I don't even know where he is. Her voice grew frantic, the controlled tone slipping. Please, George, I have nothing left. I made a mistake. You have to understand. A bitter laugh escaped me. Now you realize that? She hesitated, taking a shaky breath. I didn't realize what I was losing. I was foolish, stupid. Olivia, I interrupted, this is the life you chose. You and Declan both. You thought I was just a paycheck. Now you're realizing how much more I was. She started to cry, her voice breaking with every sob. I know. I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but please, can you just help me? For everything we once had. I was silent for a moment, weighing my words carefully. This isn't about what we had. That ended the moment you decided I wasn't enough. You'll have to figure out how to move forward on your own. I hung up, my resolve unbroken, feeling the faintest sense of closure. Meanwhile, Declan's departure left Olivia to face the harshest truths alone. Without anyone to lean on, her social circle dwindled, and the people who once flocked to her parties were nowhere to be found. She called my family, even a few of our mutual friends, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Word had spread, and sympathy wasn't coming her way. Hazel, caught in the middle, eventually distanced herself, staying with friends most nights. She reached out to me, wanted to spend more time together, and I welcomed her with open arms. Our relationship wasn't perfect, but we were working on it, one day at a time. Hazel's visits grew longer, her guarded expression softened, and slowly, we began to rebuild. As my life took a new direction, I met Aurelia, a kind-hearted woman with a warmth that seemed endless. We crossed paths at a local art class, and her laugh felt like a balm I didn't know I needed. We took things slow, both cautious and respectful of each other's pasts, but with her, trust felt easy. For the first time in a long time, I felt that I was truly seen. One weekend, Hazel met Aurelia for coffee with us. The conversation flowed easily, with Hazel laughing and sharing stories that felt like glimpses of the girl she used to be. Aurelia had that effect. She drew people in with sincerity and kindness. Afterward, Hazel pulled me aside. I like her dad. She seems good for you, she said, her voice filled with a warmth that had been missing in her tone for so long. That small nod from Hazel felt like a bridge. We'd come a long way from that dark night, and even though scars remained, we were moving forward together. Meanwhile, Olivia was left to deal with the ruins of her choices. One evening, Hazel came over, and we sat on the porch, the setting sun casting long shadows. "Mom's struggling," she said, her voice quiet. "I don't think she's been eating much. She doesn't leave the house anymore. It's hard to see her like that." I nodded, understanding the weight Hazel carried. "She's facing her consequences, Hazel. I know it's painful, but those choices were hers alone." Hazel sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I know, but I can't help feeling. I don't know. Sad for her, I guess." "Sadness doesn't mean you excuse what she did. It means you're compassionate," I replied. "She's still your mother, and it's okay to feel that way. But don't let her mistakes define you. You can choose to be different." Hazel took my words to heart, and as days turned into months, she began to focus on her own path. She found solace in her studies, her hobbies, and our moments together. The tension and anger between us were gone, replaced by a quiet understanding that, though life had dealt us a painful hand, we could still heal. Olivia's decline continued, the full weight of her choices settling on her shoulders. One day, she called, leaving a message filled with apologies, but I chose not to respond. My energy was focused on the future, on my newfound happiness, and on the people who mattered most. I'd come to understand that forgiveness was not something I owed her. She could ask for it all she wanted, but forgiveness had become a personal journey for me, one that didn't require her participation. I was moving forward without her, building a life free of the bitterness that once consumed me. As for Declan, he remained a ghost, someone I no longer cared to acknowledge. The brother I once knew was gone, replaced by a stranger. If he found happiness, it would have to be without me in his life. With Aurelia by my side and Hazel rediscovering herself, I felt the peace that had once seemed impossible. I didn't need Olivia's apologies or Declan's explanations to feel whole again. I'd created my own closure, a life defined by honesty, respect, and the quiet joy of starting anew. The scars of betrayal might remain, but they no longer held me back. I was free, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living life on my terms. Months had passed since I had severed ties with Olivia, Declan, and that life I once knew. Now, walking through town with Aurelia by my side, I felt like a different man. The breeze was light, and the hum of the town around me felt oddly peaceful. We laughed about something simple, a light-hearted joke, a shared look, and for once, I felt that weight from the past truly lift. Then, as we rounded a corner, I saw her, Olivia, standing on the opposite side of the street. She was alone, clutching her coat tight against the wind, her hair disheveled. Her eyes scanned the street and then landed on me. The brief glance she threw at Aurelia twisted into something between longing and bitterness, a look I barely recognized on the face of the woman I'd once shared my life with. She took a step forward as if she might call my name, her mouth opening slightly, her hand lifting. I felt Aurelia's fingers tighten around mine, grounding me in the present. For a moment, I almost wanted to turn back, to hear what Olivia might say, but something inside me stayed rooted. The man who had loved her, trusted her, sacrificed everything, that man was gone. I looked into her face one last time, then turned away, continuing down the street with Aurelia. "Was that?" Aurelia asked softly, sensing the tension in the air. I nodded, my voice steady. "Yeah, it was." She gave me a sympathetic look, but there was no need for explanations. She already understood what I'd been through, and for once, I didn't feel the need to dwell on it. My silence was closure enough. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a message from Hazel. Despite everything, she'd chosen to keep contact with me, albeit sporadic. This time, her message was more direct. Asterisk, can we talk? Asterisk, when we met. She looked nervous, as if she were gathering the courage to say something important. We sat down in a small cafe, the comforting smell of coffee drifting between us. Hazel fidgeted with her cup, finally looking up at me. "Dad, I know I've said it before, but I'm sorry," she began, her eyes filled with an honesty I hadn't seen in her before. "I'm sorry for the things I said that night, and I'm sorry for not believing in you when I should have. I thought I was helping Mom, but I realize now that I just made everything worse." I let her words sink in, the genuine regret softening the hardened edges of my heart. "Hazel, I know you were in a tough spot," I replied, my tone gentle. "I can't pretend it didn't hurt, but I understand that you were caught between us. You didn't deserve any of this." She looked down, her fingers trembling slightly. I wish things were different, that I could go back and fix it." I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "What's done is done, but we can move forward. We can make things better from here." She nodded, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. After our talk, I walked her back to her mother's place. As we reached the house, Olivia was sitting on the front steps, looking haggard and drained, as though the weight of her choices had caught up with her tenfold. She stared at me with a look I couldn't quite read, something between anger and resignation. "Hazel," she called softly, and my daughter moved to her mother's side. Olivia looked at me, her eyes hollow, but for once, she held no words. She simply watched, as if hoping that the silence would communicate what her words couldn't. "Goodbye, Olivia," I said quietly, keeping my voice firm. There was no longer any bitterness, just a quiet sense of finality. Her expression flickered, a glimmer of something lost, but I didn't stay to see what it was. I turned, walking away, not looking back. I could feel the emptiness behind me as I moved forward. The next morning, I found myself standing on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Aurelia was beside me, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder as we watched the waves crash below, each one erasing the marks left by the last. She looked at me, her eyes filled with compassion and understanding. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. I nodded. "I know." And for the first time in a long time, I truly did.